Hey, welcome to episode 16 of the Ascendancy podcast. Austin here.
Chris here.
On today's episode, we're going to be talking about veganism and pet ownership. This is a highly contested and controversial subject. And the first thing I want to clarify is that the concept of ownership as a whole isn't compatible with what veganism is. So, what is veganism? It is the ethical principle that humans should not exploit animals. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about what is the vegan stance on caring for animals, and is it even possible, for vegans to have animals in our lives?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited for this episode. And like Austin said, this is a topic that I have seen, debated. People are like, oh, you shouldn't be forcing a vegan diet on your dog or cat. And, people are unsure like how, the relationship will be between humans and animals in a vegan world. So yeah, we're going to get into this juicy topic today.
One of the first points that I want to touch on is actually the dietary component. Like before we even talk about the actual ethics of having animals in our lives and how to approach the situation, one subject that's brought up so much in relation to this is that we can't be guardians of dogs or cats without feeding them their quote unquote species specific diets. In other words, these cats and dogs need to consume other animals to survive or to be healthy or to thrive. And we somehow have an obligation to slaughter and enslave other animals to sustain them. So before we even cover the ethical portion, let's just read a few studies. This is a study from 2024, a longitudinal study called Domestic Dogs Maintain Clinical, Nutritional, and Hematological Health Outcomes when Fed a Commercial Plant-Based Diet for a Year. And this study assessed 15 clinically healthy adult dogs over a 12-month period. The dogs were fed a commercially available, nutritionally complete plant-based diet where pea protein as a main ingredient, and researchers monitored clinical, nutritional, and hematological parameters to evaluate the diet's adequacy. The key findings of the study: the dogs maintained normal clinical health markers throughout the study. The nutritional parameters, including essential amino acids, remained within normal ranges, and the hematological values did not show any adverse changes. So the conclusion of this study was a well-formulated commercial plant-based diet can sustain the health of adult dogs over a year, indicating its potential as a viable alternative to traditional meat-based diets. Now here is a true controversy. Not too many people have, that strong of an opinion on whether or not dogs should be fed plant-based diets. But when we get into the subject of cats, we hit a few landmines here. So let's take a look at the highest level of evidence we have available on the subject. This is a systematic review from 2023 published in Veterinary Sciences titled The Impact of Vegan Diets on Indicators of Health in Dogs and Cats, a systematic review. The key findings are that there were no health disorders were found to be more likely in cats fed vegan diets. Some studies reported health benefits, such as improved body condition scores and reduced gastrointestinal and hepatic disorders in cats on vegan diets. And then, of course, this evidence base is limited, but this is an actual meta-analysis conducted on 16 studies. So as far as the highest level of evidence out right now on this subject, it does appear that cats can thrive and even be potentially healthier on vegan diets. Another study found that when you compare cats on vegan diets to cats on meat-based diets, the cats on vegan diets had lower reporting of actual health conditions. So I will link these studies cited and more in the description, so that way you can go through them. And don't take my word for it. Never take anyone's word on anything scientific. Look into it yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for taking the research away and delivering what the current science has to say on the subject to the listeners. And like you said, I think a lot of people can kind of swallow the idea that dogs can be, thriving on a vegan diet because, people recognize they're omnivorous. They've grown alongside humans for thousands of years through domestication. So it's good to know that there is some research on that. And then when it comes to the cats, like you said, it's a bit more contentious. People have that ingrained in their mind that cats are obligate carnivores, which they technically are. But then there's the fallacious conclusion that they must eat animal flesh, particularly they must eat animals. So we'll definitely check out the research in the description, and we hope to see more. We will see more research conducted in the coming years, and we definitely need it. But the current research is promising, and it does seem to indicate that if you plan to diet properly with your veterinarian, and you get a good brand, that your companion animal can be healthy on a vegan diet. But before we go into some of the next points, I wanted to ask Austin. Yeah, I think there are some animals under your care. I'm not sure dogs or cats, but do you guys have a vegan food regimen that you have for them? Like any suggestions for viewers of specific brands to buy for their companion animals?
Yeah, we do. The brands that we use are actually fairly obscure. I'll put the links in the bio. I don't recall them off the top of my head, but they're actually yeast based. So a lot of like the formulations, for plant-based dog foods or like pea or soy or other legumes, yeast-based food actually has a superior amino acid and micronutrient content relative to animal flesh. So if we look at it like purely biologically, what does an obligate predator need to survive? They're going to potentially have better outcomes with a yeast-based protein source than with a meat or animal-based protein source. So that's what we opt for, and it is sort of an obscure brand. I know when I go and buy it, I have it saved, and I go and look for it. But I'll put that in the description, so that way, if you have vegan cats, you can find it. But there are some popular brands that I know of that a lot of people do swear by, like AMI, Benevolent. There's Evolution brand vegetarian dog food that is a vegan formula, so you can look into that. So there are quite a few options out there that are readily available and affordable, but I'll put the link so people can go and check them out for themselves.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I wanted to definitely get your feedback there because I've seen, some pictures and videos from you of animals under your care. I think dogs, some cats. So it's good to know that, you're making it work. You're feeding them vegan diet and they seem healthy and thriving. And I think you recommended like Benevo or V-Dog. Have you heard of those? Are those potential options for people?
Yeah, I've heard of Benevo. V-Dog, I'm not 100% sure on, but we
Mhm.
can look into it and see like how it stacks up. Another thing to note though on this subject is that these plant-based or vegan pet food formulas weren't like created like spur of the moment or like in a half-assed way. They actually analyze like the needs and nutrient, demands of dogs and cats, and they formulate these foods to meet them. So they'll add taurine to them or vitamin B12, or they'll make sure the protein content, fat content, carbohydrate content is all within ranges that are healthy for these animals. And you can even like take a look side by side and compare like a regular cat kibble or dog kibble, something like this, to the vegan alternative and compare the macronutrient and micronutrient breakdown, and you're going to find they're virtually identical. And this is because like these aren't spur of the moment things. These are created by dietitians and veterinarians to have the best possible formula, for people's companions, which they care so much about.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because a lot of people aren't sure like of this new innovative, kinds of foods being made, and there has been a lot of time put into making sure it's a proper formula, and it's not just something kind of made half-assed, like you said. So yeah, I encourage listeners to check out some of those links in the description to look at these products. And another point I want to make before we kind of go on with the rest of the episode and address some of the common objections and talk about the concept of pet ownership as a whole. One thing I want to make note is that same thing as in the human context, the human body needs nutrients, not necessarily, you know, specific sources. So like the body needs amino acids, the body needs fats, the body needs carbohydrates, and it doesn't necessarily place a lot of importance on where it comes from. It just needs those building block materials. So when you look at it in the context of cats and dogs, that's why a properly formulated, vegan food can be made for them, because at the end of the day, the biological organism just needs the building blocks, doesn't place a lot of importance on where specifically that it's coming from. And obviously it has to be formulated in a proper like food matrix. There has to be certain proportions of maybe fiber involved with certain things, but in general that's kind of why this works out. So it's the same as with humans. We don't need to eat animals flesh or secretions to be healthy. We don't need to be eating their flesh to get protein. We can get protein, we can get amino acids from plant sources, and our body doesn't know the difference. So it's the same thing in the animal companion animal context. So going a little further into this episode, we're going to address some of the kind of objections and concerns that people often bring up when we talk about this. I know you have, as well as I, Austin, debating people about this, especially on social media, and we hear like some of the common objections when people get pretty angry when you bring up feeding a dog vegan diet or feeding a cat vegan diet. So we're going to go through some of those common objections. The first one is that it's not natural. Of course, this is something we hear all the time when we're outreaching or engaging with non-vegans on the street, getting humans to try to go vegan. In the context of in companion animals, people are going to say the same thing, that it's not natural. These animals have been, eating a certain way for thousands of years, and it's just not the natural way to do things. So our response to this is that whether something is natural or not has no bearing on, how we should behave. So in the human context, just because it's natural that we've, hunted animals and consumed them for thousands and thousands of years, it doesn't mean that it's moral to do so, or that it makes sense in today's world. We have to look at other, factors. We have to look at other circumstances, and the science shows that humans can be healthy and thriving on a well-planned vegan diet. So, and the science is coming in on companion animals as well. It's showing that they can be healthy on a well-planned vegan diet with proper formulation, fortification. So whether it's natural or not just doesn't matter. It's completely irrelevant. This is known as the appeal to nature fallacy. You can Google it and read about it. It's a well-known fallacy in philosophy, kind of just an error in logic that just doesn't work. And it's not consistent, because there are many things that are natural that we can obviously understand are not good, like viruses, diseases, hurricanes, tornadoes. Like, these things are natural. Does that mean that they're good? Like, obviously not. Like, is using a toilet or brushing your teeth natural? Like, no, but you're still going to do it because it improves your life and improves hygiene and just kind of keeps society, at a better pace. So it's the same thing there. Anything to add, Austin, before we go on to the next point?
Yeah, I do have something to add to that. First of all, nature doesn't equate to morality in any way, as you've said and well said. The next thing is that nothing about breeding animals and forced inbreeding them to have a certain look and to be our companion is natural, right? It's not natural for a 6 pound cat to dive 300 meters down into the ocean and hunt an 800-pound tuna. That's not natural, right? It's not natural for your pet chihuahua who weighs 5 pounds to eat a 1,200-pound steer. Nothing about what you're doing in this space of feeding animals to your selectively bred little companion friend is natural. Just by the way, just to put that out there, it's just a very ridiculous argument for many reasons. And then the next thing that we're going to address is forcing your will onto animals. If you feed your animal, your companion animal, adopted animal, a vegan diet or plant-based diet, you're forcing your will onto them, is another point that we hear sometimes. No matter what we feed these animals, we're quote unquote forcing our will onto them. But is it better to quote unquote force our will onto others in a way that's altruistic and non-exploitive and non-predatory, or should we take our guardianship of them as an excuse to force more animals to be slaughtered to sustain them? Like, let's look at this hypothetical, right? Let's say, I have a dog that I rescued or adopted or what have you. And you say, well, you're forcing your view on them to feed them this vegan diet. Well, someone could say, okay, well, I'm going to take my chihuahua that I rescued and feed them a diet of humans. That's obviously absurd, right? But then you have to, if you're in this position, well, then what's the trait difference between humans and animals that justifies slaughtering pigs and sheep and cows and fish to feed this chihuahua, but not you? So is this forcing, a diet onto these animals? I think it's irrelevant. I think we have to do something to sustain them, and in this given space, we have to choose the most ethical decision, which is, of course, to not slaughter and enslave other beings to feed them, whether that be other animals or humans. Chris, what's your take on that?
Yeah, those are some good points. And at the end of the day, I feel like people bringing up this objection, there's a lack of critical thought in it, because if you have a companion animal under your care, they're a moral patient under your care. They don't have the autonomy to feed themselves in the way that maybe their ancestors did far, far long ago when they lived in packs or hunted in the wild. They've been domesticated, selectively bred to be very dependent on human intervention, human stewardship. So if you're feeding your cat or dog a non-vegan diet, you're feeding them animal flesh, that's a decision. That's you forcing your will on them. At the end of the day, you're a steward of them. You decide what they eat. So it's this weird it's like a non sequitur. It's like there's no logic that follows from this. It's like you're always deciding how to treat, how to care for your companion animal. If you're deciding to feed them a vegan diet, it's no more forcing your will on them than if you're feeding them a non-vegan diet. I think people just see it as like the default, the default behavior where you don't have to think about it. It's like, oh, I just buy them the dog food, the Purina on the shelf, and then anything outside of that is like, oh, that's crazy. That's forcing like this weird ideology on the animal. It's like you're deciding what your dog eats no matter what. So it's completely bogus. So we've thoroughly debunked this point. And thanks, Austin, for sending it over to my way. And the last point we want to touch on is that when we think about the amounts of lives that are impacted when someone goes vegan, right? When a human goes vegan, they're no longer contributing their demand for the exploitation of thousands of animals, tens of thousands of animals over the course of their lifetime. With every purchase of meat, dairy, eggs, leather, fur, products tested on animals, those inputs are directly causing the exploitation, the torturing in many instances and the killing of these animals. And when you step back and you no longer provide that demand, all those animals aren't going to be directly exploited and harmed because of you. And you're helping to build a better future for all animals, a more altruistic world, hopefully becoming an activist, spreading the word that way and having an even more greater impact. And this also extends to the animals under our care. So if we want to, create the world that we want to see, where animals are truly respected as sentient individuals and not being commodified and exploited, then we should do everything in our power to create that world. And that means extending that to the companion animals under our care. It's like if we understand as moral agents ourselves, like these animals shouldn't be exploited and killed for us, thousands of them per year, the same thing should extend to the moral patients under our care, our companion animals, hundreds of sheep, of cows, of chickens, of fish. They don't deserve to be exploited and killed every year just to sustain your one animal's life. And I understand that, you may value your companion animal's life a lot and care for them, and that's great. Just feed them a vegan diet so they're no longer going to be exploiting and killing hundreds of animals per year just to sustain their one life. What makes their one life so much more superior, more important than all these hundreds of feeling sentient beings that are trapped in farms, fish farms, slaughterhouses? Like, what makes their life so much more important that, you can just say, like, hey, fuck you, vegan activist. You can't tell me to feed my cat a vegan diet, or my dog a vegan diet. Like, and that's another thing that we can touch on as well, is like, it's kind of not the priority to outreach non-vegans about feeding their companion animals a vegan diet. Like, the first step is getting them to understand their moral obligation to be vegan, and then from there it's an easier conversation to persuade them and show them, like, it's logically sounds also feed their companion animal a vegan diet. But that's an important point we want to touch on. Like, why is your one animal so much more important that you can disregard this? Like, this is a serious conversation. What do you have to say on this, Austin?
Yeah, firstly, that's a really good point, that our first objective is to get people to be vegan before we get into more like minute, complex matters. I don't think this is a complex or a minute matter in the grand scheme of things, but relative to just a person embracing veganism, sure, you have to be able to walk before you can run, so to speak. Another thing that I just find baffling in this space, especially among vegans and even a few vegan activists, is this disconnect. We talk about how people who are non-vegan can have cognitive dissonance. They have two conflicting ideas which, don't work out with each other. When it comes to this subject, people are so desensitized and they view this in this like abstract way. But if we're vegan, we understand supply and demand. We understand what happens as a result of our choices. So like, think about it this way. You're a vegan and you're watching this and you have, an animal that you want to feed other animals, right? Because you say that's healthy or natural or what have you. Imagine this. Imagine you're in a room with all of these animals who would have to be fed to this dog or this cat. Would you personally take this knife or bolt gun or macerator and personally kill all of these other animals in this room? Would you personally slit their throats? Would you personally enslave them? Would you personally shoot them? And imagine all of this exploitation, suffering, blood, torment, evil. Would you do this personally? I think if you're a vegan, you wouldn't do this. So where does this disconnect come into play for feeding your companion animal? I'm very curious about this, because I don't understand this mentality of someone who could be vegan, understand exploiting animals and slaughtering them is immoral, but then when it comes to their special little furry friend, they become like a fucking Jeffrey Dahmer or like fucking Stalin or something, and think, well, now I'm going to mass murder like every animal possible to feed my friend. That's actually insane, and that is pure arbitrary discrimination. These other animals, they owe you absolutely nothing. They've done nothing wrong to be turned into cat shit or to be turned into dog shit. There's no justifiable way to do this. This is actually pure evil, and this is insane.
Yeah, no, really, really well said. And I appreciate you drawing that picture for the listeners, because if you're vegan, and listening to that example, that grim example that Austin laid out, it should ring clearly like, this doesn't align with my vegan values. This doesn't align with my anti-exploitation stance, and hopefully it kind of gets you to reevaluate your choices. And I think I think there's just kind of like that habituation, like, so people have companion animals and they're not vegan, and they're used to feeding them a certain way for a long time, and then they become vegan through influence or exposure to an activist, and then maybe in some extent they're used to just kind of doing this routinely for their companion animal, and they may be fearful of putting their health at risk, so then that's where these objections may come from. But as we laid out, the science is showing that it can be done when planned properly and you get a good formulation. It's worth that, risk, so to speak, to get them on that vegan diet. Because if you think about all the animals that are being exploited and tortured and killed on the back end, it's absolutely horrific, and it should just come logically as a natural next step. So this also shows, like, when you become vegan, the homework isn't done, like, just ride off into the sunset. Like, there is still more things to do. There's more research to conduct, and like, in what ways is my lifestyle still supporting animal exploitation? We go through life just kind of going through our normal routines, our normal habits, our normal purchases, and we don't realize where certain purchases are actually directly in contention with our values, and this topic is one of them. So when you become vegan, it's still prudent to stay on top of your game. Think about the other ways that your lifestyle could be contributing to animal exploitation, and rooting that out is a process that still takes time, still takes months, still takes years. There's still things that I come across, being vegan 7 years now, where I'm like, oh wow, that's not vegan, or that comes from animal exploitative industries. Wow, I didn't know that. I'm gonna avoid purchasing that. So it's a constant process, and it's important for vegans to still use their thinking caps, still use their critical thinking skills after they make the change, and think about these other things. So that's what I wanted to add on there. And then we're going to go into the second part of this podcast now, and we're going to just kind of talk about human-animal relationships as a whole when it comes to imagining a vegan world where we don't have animals exploited, where we're not just kind of reducing them to commodities, we're respecting their individuality, their sentience, their subjective experience. We're kind of going to reimagine, like, what would that world look like when it comes to pet ownership. So as Austin said in the intro, vegans are against the concept of pet ownership, of pet breeding, because it runs against the principle of being opposed to animal exploitation. So if you're owning someone, you're subjugating them, you're reducing them to an object that you own, instead of recognizing their individuality, their sentience. So obviously we're against the concept of pet ownership. Now, when we look at language, like, it's okay to say, like, oh, my cat or my dog. It's not like the semantic kind of saying, like, oh, we shouldn't be using that language, because if you look at the human context, it's perfectly normal to say, like, oh, my brother or my sister, my aunt. Like, when we hear that language, we don't think like, oh, are you saying you own your sister or you own your aunt? It's like, no, this is just language. So we're not saying, like, vegans shouldn't be calling their companion animals, like, oh, my dog or my cat. It would be the same thing as, like, saying my dog, or rather my dad or my mother, my aunt. So we're not saying that, but just the concept as a whole, that you own the animal, that you're entitled to do, like, whatever you want to them. Of course, you have to consider their interests and really respect their individuality. So that's what we mean when we say that. Do you have anything to add there, Austin?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We're not here to harp on semantics. We get to the actual core of issues ethically. And that brings us to the next subject is what should we do right now? Because there are millions of animals who are going to potentially be killed within shelters, what have you. Should we let them be killed? Should we let them be adopted and then be fed other animals? I view it as a moral virtue to be a guardian for animals, to actually give them a good life, to actually help them, to care for them, to adopt them, because it's like the least we can do for them. I mean, they've been forced inbred to have breathing difficulties or cardiovascular disease or have all of these health problems just to have appearances that humans find palatable. This is a very evil and a very perverse thing that humans have done to animals. Like if you look at what we call dogs, these are genetically gray wolves. These are gray wolves that humans have for millennium forced to inbreed to have a desired look. And this is a very evil thing. And I think we owe it to them to take care of them, to, make sure that their rest of their existence on Earth isn't horrible. So I think that adopting animals, is a good thing. To be their guardian, to protect them, shelter them, I think is aligned with veganism. It's non-exploitive, and it is a moral virtue. And on that, Chris, you want to tackle the next subject, a big subject of animal breeding?
Yeah. Yeah, so this subject kind of ties into a point I want to make on what you said. So all these domesticated animals, they exist because of human decisions. So if you think about selective breeding over thousands of years, now we've normalized the institution of breeding animals for consumer purchasing, for buying designer dogs or buying pit bulls that have just strangely shaped skulls and muzzles that make it hard to breathe. It's like we've created this problem in the first place where we have shelters that are just overflowing with animals that were undesired or not purchased from the breeder. Like Austin said, I do think it's a virtue to be the steward of these animals. Like this lonely animal in the cage, it's not their fault that they exist and that no one wants them. I think it's virtuous to still adopt them. Obviously we're against breeders. We're going to talk about that. It's if you're gonna bring a companion animal into your life, always adopt, don't shop, because because we created this problem where there's a surplus, so to speak, of animals that people don't want. It's like we can't just, the vegan stance is not just, oh, we should just let them be killed and just kind of go on with life and have no interaction with animals. It's like because humans brought this problem into existence, we kind of owe it back to these animals to take care of them, be their stewards if possible. So going into this topic of breeding, obviously it's opposed to what veganism is. So the whole concept of breeding cats and dogs for consumer purchase, it's reducing animals to commodities, it's exploiting them for profit, and even if it's not for profit, it's still treating animals as like leverage. It's like, oh, if I give my neighbor, some of these kitties from the litter, maybe they'll do more XYZ for me, or this and that. It's like, we're not into that. It's against the principles of veganism. And the whole reason, shelters are overflowing with animals in the first place is because people are supporting breeders. So these facilities, these people that breed animals either in-house or I'm not sure the intricacies of this, if there's operations, if there's like buildings where this is done, but it's obviously against what veganism is, and we definitely advocate to adopt and not shop for animals in pet stores, because at the end of the day it's creating the very problem where there's so many animals that are going to kill shelters, that are going to these adopt centers where they don't have anyone caring for them. It's just creating that problem. So it's like, why are you buying an animal when you can adopt one and work toward not contributing that demand to this fucked up system in the first place. So yeah, we're obviously against breeders, and just always adopt. And what do you have to say on this, Austin?
Yeah, well said, very well said. A lot of people have this myopic view where they're only outraged at these organizations for euthanizing animals, and I think it's horrible that this happens. But we have to realize this is a result of people viewing animals as objects, viewing them as these friends that we can have bred into existence, to serve us. And there's another, big problem with this too, is that like as vegan activists, a lot of us like to draw comparisons between, like, for example, a cow or a pig and a dog, and I do this too. I think this can be a valid comparison in some points, but in some instances, but the animals that humans view as pets are still exploited, they're still enslaved, they're still tormented. I mean, imagine, you see so many horrific stories of people torturing dogs and cats to death. And this is a symptom of a larger problem of, billions of non-vegans, people who prey on animals multiple times per day, every day of their life. They have, these animals under their care. Obviously very bad things are going to happen, to these animals. Like these animals who are bred are victims, absolutely. And I'm not saying that every non-vegan tortures dogs or cats or something like this, but they do this. This is a very large, wide-scale systemic problem as a result of non-vegans, owning animals. Viewing them as their like personal slaves or friends or companions, what have you. These animals have horrible lives. Some of them are chained up on like a several foot long metal line, just going in circles barking, or kept, locked in a house for 12 hours at a time with no mental stimulation. The lives for a lot of these animals that people view as pets is horrible. And when you talk about other animals too, fish and hamsters and rats, and people giving these small animals to their kids who are like borderline psychotic, this is just an egregious injustice. Or people owning snakes and feeding thousands and thousands of animals alive to these snakes. This is a huge problem. And I remember a while ago I saw a study that was saying that the amount of animals slaughtered to sustain quote-unquote pets in the U.S. is equivalent to the meat consumption of France. Like that's mind-blowing. It's just horrible. So this whole concept of like pet ownership and non-vegans having pets or feeding other animals to animals, this isn't like a small problem. This is a huge aspect of this injustice, of course. So I think this is a really important thing. My perspective, long term, should humans have pets? Should humans own animals? Absolutely not, especially not people who view animals as objects. And I don't think that humans should sterilize every animal, or kill every animal or something like this, or make every domesticated animal intentionally go extinct or something like this. But I think we owe them guardianship. We need to stop breeding them. We need to stop treating them as objects. I think this is a very evil thing. So that's just a note I wanted to end on, is that this isn't like a small problem. This is a huge aspect of the cruelty, of the exploitation of non-veganism.
Well said. Thank you for bringing up the subject of other animals that are less commonly, looked after as companion animals, such as fish and snakes. I think in general, like Austin said, he just hit the nail on the head. We shouldn't be supporting breeders. We shouldn't be, feeding other animals to animals. Shouldn't be treating these animals like units of property, units of production. It should not be happening, and that's the way we imagine this in a vegan world. Is just, at the end of the day, if we're not supporting breeders, and we're just kind of looking after the animals that already exist, there will kind of naturally come a time where hopefully humanity is just reimagine our relationship with animals, and we won't have this, you know, scenario where the shelters are overflowing and we've got, you know, Petco and pet stores and this and that. It'll just be a different reality. So I think that's about it. Any closing remarks, Austin?
That's it. And everyone, thank you for tuning in this far. Share your thoughts below. We appreciate it. Peace.
Peace out.